Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello and welcome to Bruxelles Je t'aime, Euronews' brand new talk show, all about the European capital of Brussels, the city that many love to loathe. On Brussels, my love, we break down the big stories of the week, examine what is at stake for you and for Europe. My name is Maeve McMahon. Thanks for joining us. Coming up this week, the winter of discontent. Angry Greeks take to the streets to protest against the increasing cost of living. Similar protests have been taking place across the continent, people looking for answers. And a general strike here in Belgium brings the country and air traffic to a halt. With industrial action also in France, Spain and Austria, we're asking if a European solution is really possible, or if it's each man for himself. And help us. Europe's forgotten crisis, stranded migrants left at sea for 17 days were allowed to disembark this week in Sicily. France and Italy at each other's throats. We're taking a look at the ongoing migration question across Europe, the puzzle that EU leaders just don't want to solve. For more on these stories and much more, I'm joined in our studio by the Dutch MEP, Michiel Hoogheven, a member of the European Conservatives and Reformists.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined by Pedro Marques, a Portuguese Socialist MEP representing the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, and Elizabeth Kuiper, the Associate Director at the European Policy Centre. That's an independent think tank right here in Brussels. So thank you so much. Lovely to have you all here.
Thank you. Likewise.
So my first question, how has the cost of living crisis impacted yourselves personally? And I imagine in your case, gentlemen, your voters. We start with you, Pedro.
Yes, of course, and thank you again for having me here. I wouldn't even dream to start talking about my personal experience because I cannot even compare myself to the citizens in Europe which are really suffering. We are obviously part of this society, but I'm much more concerned with the middle classes and the really poor people that are really, really striving with this crisis. And yes, they are going to the streets, they are protesting, which I think it's normal. It's our society being alive and asking us to do more. Think that's okay. Of course, the protests have to go to a certain limit, but yes, people are suffering and we need to deliver responses. Yes, from the national governments, but certainly from the European level. And that's what we are really trying to do.
That's what we're asking here today. We're asking, can Europe save us? Will Europe save us from this winter of discontent? But let's get the perspective from yourself and hear what's it like in the Netherlands. Are people upset there? Are they angry? Are they taking to the streets? How are they coping?
Well, inflation in the Netherlands is one of the highest in the Eurozone and maybe even in the world. And I feel for the people, and especially, as my colleague said, for the middle class and the most vulnerable people in society. Because everybody feels inflation, everybody feels that prices are going up. But if you are in that middle class family, if you have a mortgage, if you have maybe kids going to college, every price increase will make life harder. And when referring to me personally, as politicians, I really feel that we are now getting to the point that we have conducted policies in the past, and we did not tell the voters that if you conduct certain policies, they have consequences.
Okay. And what about yourself, Elizabeth? Has it impacted you? How are you adjusting to this new status quo?
Well, absolutely. I think for me, the private and the professional are much more interlinked because at the European Policy Centre, a Brussels-based think tank, we're very much thinking and reflecting on social Europe and the need for social investment. And in that respect, everything that you hear from friends and from colleagues, everyone having to deal with higher energy prices, higher fuel prices, cost of living is a reality. And at the European Policy Centre, we coined the term perma-crisis, and I think that is the big issue currently. Technically, we're still in a pandemic, we have a cost of living crisis, an energy crisis, a war in Ukraine. That is a lot to deal with.
A lot to deal with, and the term social Europe, of course, we heard it meant for many years here in this town and across the continent, but not a whole lot done really in that area in the social platform. But we'll come back to that a little bit later, because now I'd like to bring in an interview that we did here at Euronews recently with the head of the IMF, that's Kristalina Georgieva, and she had a very stark warning for us right here in Europe. Take a listen.
I am not going to sugarcoat it. 23 would be tougher than 22. Next winter for Europe may be even harsher than this winter.
So 2023 will be tougher than 2022. That's according to the Bulgarian economist and the head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva. So my question is, if this is the winter of discontent, what will next winter look like? Pedro?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have to take care of the emergency, let me be clear, and I concur in general with this perspective because we are coming from a period in which we had a bit of a bounce back from the COVID crisis. But yes, 2023 really looks like harsh because of the interest rates hikes and all of that will really impact people that have mortgages to pay and all. So yes, 2023 looks hard, but now let's take care of this winter. I mean, for those citizens in Europe that already suffer from the cost of, basic life and plus the fuels and all, now it's also heating their houses through the winter. It's a real emergency. We need to have a winter emergency package here from Brussels, here from Europe, and not just at the national level.
Have the institutions here got the message? Are they addressing the needs as soon as possible, immediately? Not now. But
well, I was at the IMF some weeks ago at the annual meetings in Washington, D.C., and I spoke with many policymakers there, and they were indeed very worried. We have had policies in the past where we cut interest rates to zero, and maybe even below zero, where we had free money policies from our politicians and governments, and we are now facing the consequences with high inflation. We have the COVID pandemic with the supply chain disruptions, we have the war in Ukraine, and we now see inflation going up. So what does central banks do when inflations go up? They raise interest rates, they tighten monetary policy. But then on the other hand, if politicians don't dare to speak of getting along with these policies, also tightening their policies, you're going to have a disbalance. And I think that's a big problem.
And viewers, of course, listening in today, they understand that you're both from different political groups. You have different solutions to the crisis. I want to hear what those solutions are in just a minute, but first hear from yourself, because you've been studying this for many years as well in the European Policy Centre. What solutions are you putting on the table? What can Europe do immediately?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that indeed a lot had been said about the fact that this is a Zeitenwende. It really is indeed a point in time which is called a watershed moment, and I think it's really important that we need translated in concrete messages. And we know that the European Commission this week will launch a process which is about rethinking economic governance. And it may sound a bit technical, but it is very important when it comes to social investment, because we now know that member states are getting punished if they invest more in social investment, like education and upskilling and reskilling people. And we know that a lot of the cost of living crisis is linked to employment. So we need to invest in that really. And that will be up to member states. It's up to the Commission, to Brussels, to put forward what ideas are on the table, but it's up to member states to agree on them.
To implement them, of course, that's always the challenge. Well, let's take a look at the picture across Europe and check out what the price of bread is like here in Belgium. It's actually gone up by almost 14% here in Belgium, by 66% in Hungary and 22% in Greece. And then when it comes to energy bills, they've gone up by 67% here in Belgium, 67%, 43% in Lithuania and 40% in Greece. Greece, a country where the average salary is between 300 and 400 euros. And then when it comes to housing prices, they've gone up in the Czech Republic by 24.7%, in the Netherlands by 19.5%, and Ireland by 15%. And we haven't mentioned their construction prices and rents that have also gone up. I mean, when will this end?
Well, what we're seeing now is that inflation is getting anchored into society. So first it was only about the fuel prices, and now these fuel prices are being calculated in other prices, obviously, because you need fuel to produce products. So I think that's a big problem. But then if we look at concrete solutions, I think many in the European Commissions, many politicians are still referring to continuing with these reckless spending programs. But if you start spending as governments while the central banks is tightening monetary policy, it's like putting gasoline on fire. If you have to get rid of inflation first before you can solve any other of the economic problems we have.
And how do you explain that to your voters?
Yeah, that's really where this thing probably will get a bit more interesting, because now we have a significant difference of opinions here with Michal on this and with his political family and the centre-right. Yes, the centre-right, the group that represents these governments from the centre-right in Europe, and even the more conservatives like Michal's group, they are pushing for more hikes in the interest rates, so higher interest rates, and no action by the governments. And we say the contrary. At this moment, as we both said at the beginning, the vulnerable people and the middle classes are suffering a lot. And what we say is that There are different sources for this inflation from the Americans, but one thing is certain. The poorer people are suffering a lot. And at least the poorer people need to be helped at this moment. We are pushing for a winter solidarity package for the poorer people and for the middle classes because they really cannot handle this kind of rise of costs of energy or others. In some countries in Europe, as you referred, a quarter of the monthly salary goes to pay for energy, for heating their houses. They need to be helped through this critical period in winter. In here we have
people in Europe being left behind, Michael. What would you address to Pedro?
Well, in that sense, I think that, as I said, it's putting gasoline on fire. And it's about that as politicians, we need to start telling the truth. And if you have certain policies, if you cut interest rates to zero for more than 10 years, if you have spending programs for a long time to keep the economy going, and now you also have a war in Ukraine where we decided justifiably to sanction Russia, it has consequences. It has costs for the people. Now, we as politicians, we can say, well, we can still help you and nothing will change. But the truth is, we will face hardships and we have to tell the truth. Because if we as politicians don't look at the long term, if we don't tackle inflation first, because inflation is hurting the middle class and the lower class people the hardest, we need to tackle inflation first. And that rarely goes with a soft landing.
We will face dark times. What would you say to that? I'm just thinking of an image I saw a little bit earlier this week in Spain where a bar and restaurant owner, while people were there in the restaurant enjoying their food, he actually turned off the lights and let them eat in darkness with just candles to demonstrate against the situation and show the fact that, yeah, perhaps we're going backwards here and back to the dark ages.
Well, I think that that's very true. And I think what's also really important to stress is that it's not just a small group of vulnerable people suffering. It's also really the middle class. So in that respect, we have to think much broader than we perhaps usually have done. But I think it's equally important also to stress that there is money available. After all, after the COVID-19 pandemic, the European Union came up with a big rescue package of 750 billion euros. And President von der Leyen, the Commission President, mentioned a few weeks ago that a lot of the money isn't spent. And we should spend it on making sure that people indeed are prepared for the green transition, for indeed change in energy efficiency, but also indeed for digital skills, because we see that different sectors are now requesting different skills from people. So we need to prepare for that, really.
A lot, of course, that needs to be done. Well, you can certainly see why people are angry, why people are upset. They feel that the politicians are not giving them the answers that they need. And that's why we've seen so many people this week on the streets of Greece, on the streets of Belgium, and also on the streets of France, with a lot more industrial action, in fact, planned. And European workers hurt by the soaring cost of living went on strike, as I said, and similar protests taking place. And I actually had the chance to speak to some disgruntled strikers outside Engie on Wednesday morning. And I asked them if they thought a European solution to this cost of living crisis could be possible. We can take a listen now to that clip.
Europe is Europe. It is a lot of discussion and debates. But for the moment, we cannot say there have been any real European decisions. It is just national level.
We've waited on Europe for a while. Our government is hiding itself behind European institutions and nothing is moving. We have seen that countries can move. France has done it, Italy has done it, and we are counting on Belgium to do it too and to block gas and electricity prices.
Every country is like independently looking for a solution, and instead they should pull together. And well, they're not doing that.
So they're not doing that. European countries should pull together. That's Dries Fraven there speaking to me on Wednesday here in Brussels. I think pulling together, is it, you mentioned, Michael, that you should tell the truth more to voters. Is it time now to tell the truth as well to Europeans that they cannot pull together? They just can't agree and they will eternally be very much divided.
Well, as I said, we need to start telling the truth. And if you, for example, as the gentleman said, and by the way, I feel sympathy for these people. I mean, they have to pay the bills, and it is hard. It's really hard. However, if you start talking about a price cap is also dangerous. Because what happens if you introduce a price cap? You will increase energy demand again. Energy demand again. But we need to increase energy supply. We moved to this Green Deal. Our energy mix was based on 3 pillars: accessibility, affordability, and sustainability. We only invested in sustainability for the last couple of years. We have neglected our fossil fuels. We have neglected the affordability and the affordability aspect. And we need to start focusing on increasing energy supply.
I mean, you said you sympathy there with those protesters. I think sympathy is not really what they want, right?
No, they need answers. And the problem is that, and if Michal says we need to speak the truth, I concur with you, but then you have to also be clear saying that you are saying that limiting the prices that they are paying now is not your answer. And that should be said to them that are listening at home. You are simultaneously saying, I have sympathy for you, but I don't want to limit the prices. I don't want to support the poorer people. And that's where we have a sea of distance between us. And when you say we have not gone through the affordability part, you are saying we should go more for fossil fuels. But fossil fuels is not from Europe. It's importing from Russia and it's importing from people that are not reliable. So yes, what we are doing correctly is going for renewables from European sources. So I think we are okay going on with the Green Deal, but supporting the people through this terrible winter. That's also speaking the truth and also saying all the story to the citizens. You need to say that you are saying you don't want a control in prices and they are paying 40% more. You are saying that's correct. And that, Michael, that's where we are so much apart.
I think we're getting a real flavour here of what debate is like today in the European Parliament and also around the table when it comes to EU councils themselves. And of course, this week in Brussels, we saw the fiscal rules. They were also refreshed, if you like, with new proposals put on the table. But how on earth will the South, or the frugal, or the Southerners, the indebted Southerners and the frugals from the North meet in the middle when it comes to them?
Well, I think that the Stability and Growth Pact was made for a reason. The Stability and Growth Pact is what you refer to. And that was that you need low government debt, low government spending in order to have a competitive, strong and modern economy backed up by a strong currency, the euro in this case. And now we are saying, well, obviously these rules didn't work for some countries, so we will loosen these rules. I think that's a very bad sign. And I think, again, governments will continue to spend. But if you continue spending, if you don't balance the budget, you will not fix inflation and you will not fix the problems from the people that we've just heard.
Well, indeed, governments did spend a lot during COVID. They bailed out people and businesses. Elizabeth, have you anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you're right in setting out a history, indeed, of this pact that we're speaking about. But on the other hand, we have seen with COVID-19 that different times ask for different answers. And I think currently, and again, let's use that term perma-crisis again, we're not dealing with one crisis, but with multiple crises at the same time. So I think it's really also an opportunity, I would say, to rethink the way we think about how our economy is linked also to social Europe, to our social well-being. We have seen how also during the pandemic, planetary well-being links to also our well-being in general. So I think that comes with different rules and with different flexibilities, because after all, investment in skills, in education also pays off. It's just that requires a different mindset.
So I think the conclusion around the table is perhaps that Europe cannot save us.
No. We should not take that conclusion. We should say to the citizens that, yes, a European solution is still the best solution, even for this crisis. This is a crisis that we did not look for. I mean, this war is provoked by Russia. It's affecting all Europeans. It will still be a European response, the best way to handle this crisis.
And in fact, support for Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees is also waning with this fatigue. We can see that as well across the continent. But that's a topic that we will visit another day here on Brussels, my love. But that's all we have for now for this topic. But don't go anywhere, because after the break, we'll be taking a look at another challenge facing the European Union, and that is migration. See you soon here on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon, where we're taking a look back at the big European stories of the week. And one story that caught our eye this week was the images from Italy of migrants stranded for days on the Ocean Viking ship. They were allowed to disembark after 17 days, but I'm curious to hear from our panel on how those pictures made them feel. So we start with you, Elizabeth. You're taking a look at those pictures there and just a quick reaction.
Well, of course, these are terrible pictures. I think it really shows that something needs to be done. And in that respect, it's really important to also look at perhaps the blueprint that now the crisis in Ukraine, the Russian invasion in Ukraine offers in terms of a solution perhaps going forward, because we have seen willingness also from European countries, and it would be really important to see if that willingness can be translated to a more general approach, a more positive approach vis-à-vis migration.
Well, of course, with so many multiple crises or perma-crises, as you keep mentioning, to deal with, the issue of migration has been just really put underneath on the bottom of the to-do list here, and that's why perhaps we're seeing these images right up on her screen. And we saw the European Commission this week. They alluded to this situation in Italy. They put a press statement out calling for urgent action, saying that a singular, cohesive migration and asylum policy was needed and that it was high time to reform or take a look at the new pact on migration and asylum. According to the European Commission, if we had a functioning pact, a migration and asylum pact, we wouldn't be seeing images like that on our screens. And just to remind our viewers, that migration pact or proposal was presented back in September 2020, so 2 years ago, and it's a series of legislative proposals and roadmaps and recommendations put forward, and of course as well the idea of quotas. So Michael, I'd like to hear from you on this issue. What would you have done in that situation? And do you think if the European Union had a functioning migration pact that we wouldn't have to constantly see these sort of scenes?
Well, first of all, you called it a more or less forgotten crisis. But in my country, the Netherlands, it's still very much alive. The inflow of especially also illegal migrants is setting record after record. And we have no place in housing these asylum seekers and these migrants. So that's in the Netherlands at this very moment. It's a very big raging debate on this subject. The solution, or at least the problem of migration is one of the biggest problems that the European Union has failed to tackle for decades.
Would you agree with that, Pedro Marques?
Yes, I agree with that, even if my solutions are completely different from Michal's solutions. Yes, we have not done enough, even after the 2015 crisis, as we called it by then. Now, fortunately, with the Ukrainians, we were much more solidar. We even activated the Temporary Protection Directive that was already there and we didn't use by then. And from our side, what you can get is us saying that in 2015 we should have done the same that we did now. And not just now that they were white people, Christians, no. Even in 2015, when they were Syrians or when they came from Africa, we should have done the same. And these people stranded at sea, if they are saved at sea, it's basic human right at least to be landed and to be properly cared. And they were not in Italy for days and days after the European pressure delivered.
But why do they go at sea?
They go at sea because they are desperate. They go at sea because they want an opportunity. They want also our well-being. And what I think is that for us to sustain our well-being in the future, we will need a lot of people coming to Europe, help us growing as a society.
That's and I think comment on
that's exactly how it shows how politicized the whole discussion is. And it is true that we have seen with elections in Italy, so hence also the Italian example, but also Sweden, the discussion is not getting easier when the discussion is so polarized and politicized. Because it's true that we also, if we consider migration as an opportunity, there are sectors, for example, the care sector, the long-term care sector. There's an enormous workforce problem. So if we again take a more nuanced look at it, it might offer opportunities.
Let me talk about legal migration, labor migration. That's a different story. I think on the terms of illegal migration, we have to just, if we want a successful European Union, if we want to have a successful European common market, you need to successfully secure your common borders. And that is what the European Union is failing at.
And Michael, I'm just curious, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have left them on the boat or would you have allowed them disembark?
I would just take the Australian model on this. Say to the people, no way you'll have the European Union as your home, but we will take care of you in regional asylum centers in the region. And then you can apply for asylum within the region. Denmark, for example, is already doing that from the same group as Mr. Marques.
I think zero asylum policy, indeed, in Denmark.
They are showing the way, and that is what.
Are they showing the way?
No, I mean, there's much more we can do. Certainly not strand people in these origin countries or in these border countries and paying these countries to let people there. And certainly what we were talking and what we were seeing there, it was not even about these people, about legal or illegal migration. It was people that had to be saved at sea and landed safely and being taken care of. It was really about basic human rights that for 2 weeks were denied to the citizens by this new Italian government.
And we saw the French government call it unacceptable, and that's caused a lot of tension between France and the new Italian government,
which I totally agree
Giorgia Meloni, and that tension and those debates will definitely continue over the next couple of weeks and months as that topic of migration becomes more of a hot button issue here. And just wanted to ask you all something else. Meanwhile, here in Brussels, just a 20-minute walk from the European Commission, downtown Brussels, there's another humanitarian crisis unfolding. For the last few weeks, Dozens of people have been sleeping out in a line to apply for asylum. They've no shelter and they've limited food. And even those tasked to look after them went on strike because they didn't agree with their treatment. Have you guys seen that story?
I saw that indeed, and I think it's another sign again, it's a terrible situation that we should try to avoid. And therefore also another learning from dealing with the migration from Ukraine is that the solidarity platform, which has been established to have communication between the regional, national, but also international actors to really have a better also sort of planning when it comes to dealing with refugees. I think that is very important because again, if you can properly plan for numbers and for, you know, location, etc., I think at least that is something very practical that can be done.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, when I see these images, I feel that we are failing as European project. I mean, these people are seekers of refugee status. At least they need to be properly handled the right to apply for this. I mean, this idea that we should leave them out of the border or at sea or in this kind of asylum centers, waiting and waiting so that they cannot call back home to say, come to Europe. I mean, this is inhumane. This is inhumane. We cannot fail. Of course, we want legality, but we cannot fail as European project because we were built out of diversity.
Well, I think these images show that indeed our policies are failing, and that is the policies of open borders, of saying that people are welcome here, and that we have no place and no means to manage this. So we need to start setting borders.
Okay, another very interesting conversation there. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid, though. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching
Pleasure.
here
Thank you.
on Euronews. Hello there, this is Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon. Now, one story that had us hooked this week was across the pond, the US midterm elections. We were having a look at them, and on that point, we want to just show you a clip now featuring somebody that we haven't seen for a while. Take a look.
2 years ago, we were a great nation, and we will be a great nation again. I'm going to be making a very big announcement on Tuesday, November 15th at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida.
So, Donald Trump there. Elizabeth Kuiper, will you be tuning in to that big announcement?
I am going to tune in, but I actually hope that it's not going to happen because, again, the outcome of the elections, hopefully, is something that perhaps would prevent Mr. Trump from making the announcement, but let's see for that on the 15th.
Well, he's certainly under a little bit of pressure to postpone that big announcement by some in the Republican Party. Yourself, Michiel?
Well, many were expecting a big red wave, but it became something much less. And I do believe that it was supposed to be a referendum on Joe Biden's presidency, which is, you're seeing prices go up, and he's one of the most disliked persons in the United States. But for many people, it was also a referendum still on Donald Trump. And Donald Trump doesn't seem to get that he is, after Joe Biden, the most disliked person in,
really?
Or before Joe Biden.
Well, one thing I know is that Mr. Trump's image is really haunting me this week because colleagues from ZDF from Germany was just at the parliament this week at the day of the elections with this image again asking us to say, what do you think about this guy? What's your mood on this guy? And obviously it was a negative one. I really expect Mr. Trump to think twice.
If you use that word haunting, you certainly do not want to see
great.
a Donald Trump comeback. But what about yourself, Michiel?
Well, I think that Donald Trump had it was quite unique that he had a presidency already. But I think that it's time for him to move on and let other people come in.
And what would a Donald Trump presidency again mean for EU transatlantic relations?
Well, I think Trump led to such a lot of polarization, and in that respect, I think another Trump era would not lead to, I think, constructive relations in that respect.
And has Europe even been following the US midterm elections?
Well, I think we were looking at the elections, at least the more people more connected to politics. Yes, America became much more radical in that period, and polarization grew a lot in the country. And yes, it did not help the relations, the transatlantic relations. So I think we are hoping for, as Michal just said, Democrats, Republicans, that's democracy working, but at least less polarization and get back to normal times in democracy in America. That's certainly something.
Get back to normal times. So who could fit that position, do you think?
Well, I think there are some talents within the Republican Party that can. I think that Governor Youngkin from Virginia is doing quite well. But if you look at Florida and the elections results there, you see Ron DeSantis, who did a phenomenal job. He might have a bigger chance of to get the presidency than Donald Trump.
Okay, well, Joe Biden is not going anywhere for the moment, but we will certainly be, of course, keeping an eye on that story and seeing, of course, what the US midterm elections means for Europe and what the future of the United States means for Europe vis-à-vis trade issues, vis-à-vis, of course, the war in Ukraine, and vis-à-vis, of course, the stance on Russia, because that could perhaps change as well if Donald Trump, Pedro Marques, was in power.
Well, that's certainly a risk, even if the Republicans say no, that they will keep on supporting Russia. But we know about the close relations in the past between Mr. Trump and his conglomerate and Putin and his friends there and the kleptocrats there in Russia. So yes, there is certainly a huge risk. But I would say let's talk less about Mr. Trump. Let's talk about American democracy. Let's see if from our side we can get reliable partners for the future and not that kind of radicalization again. That's really my final wish.
Yeah, let's talk about substance. I think, as you say, there's a lot that we can talk about, like trade, but also like digital issues. How do we deal with tech platforms, etc.? I think there's a lot we have in common there. So let's please focus on that.
That is all we have time for. Thank you so much for all that substance, all that talk on very interesting topics. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you very soon here on Euronews and Euronews.com.